The cruelest betrayals are never whispered in private. They are performed under chandeliers for the whole world to applaud. Snow drifted softly against the 30-foot glass windows of the Blackmont Grand Hotel, while Manhattan glittered beneath the December sky like a field of broken diamonds. Inside the ballroom, the air smelled of champagne, white roses, and old money. A live orchestra played low enough for secrets to survive between wealthy smiles, and at the center of it all stood Marceline Brooks in a satin black gown that shimmered beneath the golden lights like midnight water. She had spent 12 years beside Calloway Thorne, 12 years learning how silence worked in rooms where billionaires smiled with their mouths, but never with their eyes. The photographers loved them tonight. America's favorite power couple. The white billionaire king and the elegant black wife who never embarrassed him in public. But people only admired polished glass because they never saw the cracks underneath. Marceline noticed the lipstick stain on Calloway's champagne glass before she noticed the woman wearing his attention. Vessa Langley stood near the orchestra platform in silver silk, young enough to mistake arrogance for beauty and reckless enough to enjoy being watched. Every few minutes, Calloway glanced toward her like gravity itself belonged to her. Then the ballroom temperature seemed to drop all at once. Marceline felt it before it happened. The orchestra softened. Conversation slowed. 100 wealthy strangers became quiet spectators waiting for entertainment. Calloway removed the black velvet coat from Marceline's shoulders, the very coat he had once wrapped around her during a freezing Chicago winter when he still drove a used sedan and promised he would love her forever. For one impossible second, Marceline thought maybe he remembered that night too. But then he turned away from her and placed the coat around Vessa's shoulders instead. Cameras flashed instantly. A few women gasped behind manicured fingers. Someone laughed too softly to be called cruel and too loudly to be called accidental. Vessa smiled like she had just won something expensive. But Marceline did not cry. She did not argue. She simply stood there with bare shoulders beneath the cold ballroom air, while Calloway adjusted another woman's collar with the tenderness he no longer saved for his wife. And somehow, that hurt more than rage ever could. If you're listening to this story tonight from a small apartment, a late-night highway, or a quiet room where somebody once underestimated your worth too, leave your city in the comments and tell me what emotion is sitting in your heart right now. Because sometimes the people who stay silent the longest are the ones carrying the deepest storms. Marceline slowly lifted her chin, her diamond earrings catching the light like tiny blades. Then she gave the room a calm smile, so controlled it unsettled everyone watching. And without saying a single word to her husband, she turned and walked alone through the sea of staring millionaires while snow continued falling beyond the windows like heaven itself had witnessed the betrayal. The cold outside Manhattan felt kinder than the ballroom Marceline had just walked out of. Her silver heels touched the marble steps of the Blackmont Grand Hotel with slow, controlled elegance while snowflakes dissolved against her bare skin. Behind the massive glass doors, music continued playing as if humiliation were just another performance rich people consumed with dessert and champagne. A valet hurried toward her holding an umbrella, but Marceline quietly declined with a small shake of her head. She wanted to feel the winter air. She wanted something honest against her skin tonight. Across the street, traffic crawled beneath glowing Christmas lights wrapped around bare trees. New York looked beautiful from a distance. It always did. That was the problem with beautiful things. They hid rot very well. Her driver stepped out of the black Maybach immediately. "Mrs. Thorne?" he asked carefully, noticing her missing coat. Marceline paused before answering. For the first time in years, that last name sounded heavy to her. Like jewelry she no longer wanted to wear. "Take me home, Nolan." Her voice remained calm, smooth, almost gentle. But the silence afterward carried something final inside it. The ride uptown lasted 23 minutes. Neither of them spoke. Marceline stared through the rain-speckled window while the city blurred into streaks of gold and white. Somewhere between 57th Street and Park Avenue, her mind drifted backward to a smaller apartment more than a decade ago. Back when Calloway Thorne had been ambitious instead of powerful. Back when he used to kiss her forehead while working late at a kitchen table covered in unpaid bills and investor rejection letters. He had once told her, "When I finally become somebody, you will never feel cold again." Tonight another woman was wearing that promise. When the car finally stopped in front of the Thorne estate, Marceline did not move immediately. The mansion stood glowing against the snowy night like a palace carved out of loneliness. For stories tall, 12,000 square feet. Imported stone from Italy. Custom iron gates. Everything money could buy except peace. Inside, the house staff lowered their eyes the moment they saw her shoulders exposed to the freezing weather. Nobody mentioned the missing coat. Wealthy homes survived on silence the same way churches survived on prayer. Marceline climbed the staircase slowly, one hand brushing against the polished walnut railing. Calloway once insisted she choose herself because he said her taste made empty places feel alive. But tonight, every room felt staged, like a museum dedicated to a marriage already dead. Inside her bedroom suite, she finally removed her earrings and placed them carefully beside her wedding ring on the marble vanity. Then she looked at herself in the mirror for a very long time. No tears came. That frightened her more than heartbreak itself. Because a woman crying still meant she hoped something could be saved. But a woman who became quiet was already learning how to leave. At 2:14 in the morning, the master bedroom remained dark except for the faint glow of Manhattan spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Marceline sat alone beside the vanity in absolute silence, still wearing the black satin gown from the gala, as snow continued falling beyond the glass like ash drifting through the sky. Somewhere downstairs, the grandfather clock echoed through the mansion every 60 seconds, each sound reminding her how long she had spent pretending this marriage was still alive. She reached slowly toward the velvet jewelry box where her wedding ring rested beside her earrings, but instead of touching the diamond, her fingers stopped on an old photograph tucked beneath it. The corners were worn from years of being hidden and unfolded too many times. In the picture, Calloway looked 29 instead of 41, thinner, exhausted, standing outside a tiny apartment building in Chicago wearing a wool coat that cost less than one of his ties did now. Marceline stood beside him holding takeout coffee in both hands while snow covered the sidewalk around them. They looked happy in the way struggling people sometimes do before success teaches them to become strangers. Back then, nobody knew Calloway Thorne. Investors ignored him. Banks rejected him. One winter, the heating inside their apartment broke for 9 days straight during a brutal January storm. Marceline still remembered sleeping in layered sweaters while Calloway worked through the night building presentations for companies that never called him back. He used to apologize constantly for not being able to give her more. But she had never cared about money. She cared about the way he looked at her when the world had nothing left to offer him. Marceline closed her eyes slowly as another memory surfaced. The coat. It had been the first expensive thing Calloway ever bought after landing his first major contract. He surprised her with it 3 days before Christmas, standing in their cramped kitchen grinning like a boy who had finally conquered the impossible. One day, he told her while wrapping it carefully around her shoulders, "When everybody sees you beside me, they are going to know exactly who stood with me before any of this existed." At the time, the coat was not luxury. It was gratitude. It was love made visible. Tonight, he had handed that memory to another woman without hesitation. Marceline opened her eyes again and stared at her reflection in the mirror. The same dark brown eyes that had watched Calloway rise from nothing were now looking at a woman she barely recognized. Wealth had changed the house, the city, the people around them. But the cruelest change had happened quietly inside the man she once believed would protect her heart more carefully than his own reputation. Downstairs, she finally heard the front doors open. Low voices. Footsteps. Calloway was home. Marceline did not move. She simply sat there in the dim light while the sound of his shoes crossed the marble floors below, and for the first time in 12 years, she realized she no longer waited for him with love, only with clarity. Calloway entered the bedroom just after 3 in the morning carrying the scent of expensive whiskey, winter air, and the faint perfume Marceline no longer recognized as hers. He loosened his tie slowly when he noticed her sitting awake beside the window in complete silence. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The distance between them felt larger than the 12,000 square feet surrounding them. "You should have stayed at the gala," he finally said, his voice low and tired, as if the humiliation she endured had merely been an inconvenience to his evening. Marceline kept her eyes on the falling snow outside. "I did not realize my presence was still necessary after you gave my coat away." Calloway exhaled sharply, already irritated by accountability. "It was just a coat, Marceline. The words settled heavily into the room. Just a coat. As though memories could be stripped of meaning the same way people stripped price tags from luxury gifts. Marceline turned toward him slowly then, studying the man she once defended against every criticism the world threw at him. The sharp jawline remained. The expensive tailored suit remained. The confidence remained. But the warmth was gone now, replaced by the cold entitlement wealth often carved into powerful men. No, she said quietly. It was not. Calloway looked away first. That alone told her everything. Downstairs, somewhere deep inside the mansion, a phone buzzed against marble. Calloway checked the screen automatically before placing it face down. But not quickly enough. Marceline saw the name. Vesa. The silence after that became unbearable. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just devastating in the quietest possible way. Calloway removed his watch and set it on the dresser. You are overthinking this. Marceline almost smiled at that. 12 years of loyalty reduced to overthinking. 12 years of standing beside him while reporters mocked her background, while wealthy families whispered that she did not belong in their circles, while investors treated her like decoration instead of the woman who helped build half the relationships that saved his company in the early years. And now another woman wore the symbol of everything they survived together while her husband defended it like a minor social mistake. Before Marceline could answer, her own phone lit up softly against the vanity table. A message notification. Unknown number. She picked it up slowly. Attached was a photograph taken less than an hour earlier at the gala. Vesa stood laughing beside Calloway near the ballroom staircase, still wrapped in the black velvet coat. Underneath the photo were only 7 words. Thank you for raising him for me. Calloway noticed the change in Marceline's expression immediately. What is it? He asked. She stared at the message for several seconds before locking the screen calmly. Then she rose to her feet with terrifying composure, smoothing the fabric of her gown as though preparing for a business meeting instead of the collapse of her marriage. Nothing, she said softly. I just finally understand the room I have been standing in all these years. And for the first time since Calloway Thorne became a billionaire, something unfamiliar moved across his face as he looked at his wife. Fear. Morning arrived quietly over the Thorne estate, pale winter sunlight stretching across marble floors that suddenly felt colder than usual. Marceline had not slept. She changed out of the black satin gown just before dawn and now stood inside her private dressing room, wearing a cream cashmere sweater and tailored ivory pants, looking less like a billionaire's wife and more like a woman preparing to reclaim herself piece by piece. The house remained silent except for distant footsteps from the staff downstairs beginning their routines. Somewhere in another wing of the mansion, Calloway was still asleep, or pretending to be. Marceline no longer cared enough to know the difference. She opened the walk-in closet slowly and stared at rows of designer clothing arranged with perfect precision beneath soft recessed lighting. 12 years of appearances. 12 years of charity galas, investor dinners, magazine interviews, and carefully controlled smiles. Every expensive dress hanging before her suddenly looked like a costume from a life that no longer belonged to her. Then her eyes landed on the empty space where the black velvet coat used to hang. The absence hurt more than the memory itself. She reached for a leather overnight bag and began packing calmly. Not recklessly, not emotionally, methodically. A few personal items. Important documents. Her mother's old Bible. The framed photograph from Chicago. Nothing else. Wealth had taught her an important lesson over the years. The more expensive a thing became, the less attached she felt to it. At 8:15, Calloway entered the dining room downstairs expecting another ordinary morning. Fresh coffee waited on the table beside financial reports and market updates prepared by assistants before sunrise, because powerful men liked believing the world organized itself around their schedules. But this morning something was different. The chair across from him sat empty. No soft jazz music played in the background. No vase of fresh white orchids decorated the center of the table the way Marceline always arranged them. Even the silence felt abandoned. "Where is Mrs. Thorne?" he asked one of the house staff. The woman lowered her eyes carefully. "Mrs. Thorne requested privacy this morning, sir." Calloway frowned slightly, irritation mixing with discomfort. Before he could respond, he noticed an envelope resting beside his coffee cup. Thick ivory paper. His full name written across the front in Marceline's elegant handwriting. Something tightened immediately in his chest. He opened it slowly. Inside were three things: her wedding ring, a key to the estate, and divorce papers already signed. For several seconds, the room became completely still around him. Calloway stared at the signature at the bottom of the page as though it belonged to someone else. Marceline Brooks Thorne. Clean. Certain. Final. His jaw tightened instantly. Not from heartbreak yet. From disbelief. Men like Calloway always imagined they would be the ones to leave first. Control had shaped his entire life for too long. He grabbed his phone and called her immediately. Once. Twice. Straight to voicemail. Upstairs, Marceline stood near the bedroom window watching snow melt slowly across the terrace railing while her phone vibrated silently against the nightstand beside her. She did not pick it up. For the first time in years, Calloway Thorne no longer had immediate access to her voice. And somewhere deep beneath his anger, beneath his pride, beneath the empire he spent 12 years building, panic finally began to bloom. By noon, the storm over Manhattan had faded into freezing rain, leaving gray streaks across the windows of Thorne Global headquarters. From the 82nd floor, the city below looked distant and insignificant, but inside the executive conference room, tension moved through the air like electricity before lightning. Calloway sat at the head of the 12-foot walnut table surrounded by attorneys, financial advisors, and board members pretending not to notice the unsigned coffee cooling beside him. He had not stopped calling Marceline since sunrise. 21 calls. 6 unanswered messages. Silence from her felt unnatural. Dangerous. Across the room, a quarterly projection flashed across a massive screen while executives discussed international expansion, but Calloway barely heard any of it. His attention kept drifting toward the divorce papers folded inside his leather briefcase like a wound he could not close. Then another problem arrived. "Sir," his chief legal officer said carefully, adjusting his glasses, "there is an issue involving the Westbridge acquisition." Calloway finally looked up. What kind of issue? The attorney hesitated just long enough to irritate him. A protected shareholder account connected to the emergency capital infusion from 7 years ago has been frozen pending authorization. Calloway frowned immediately. That account was anonymous. It was, the attorney replied quietly. Until this morning. The conference room became still. A document appeared on the screen. Calloway stared at the name attached to the account and felt something inside him drop with terrifying force. Marceline Brooks Thorne. Several executives exchanged confused glances. One of the older board members leaned forward slowly. "Your wife funded the rescue capital during the Denver collapse." Nobody answered at first. 7 years earlier, Thorne Global had nearly disappeared after a disastrous infrastructure deal drained the company within weeks. Investors panicked. Banks withdrew support. Headlines predicted bankruptcy. Calloway remembered those months as the darkest period of his career. But then, almost overnight, an anonymous emergency investor appeared through a protected legal trust and injected enough capital to stabilize the company long enough for recovery. Calloway spent years believing one of his silent European partners had saved him. Now the truth sat glowing across the screen in black letters. Marceline. The room around him suddenly felt smaller. "That cannot be right," Calloway said sharply, though his voice lacked conviction. The attorney slid another folder toward him. "The trust records were released this morning because Mrs. Thorne requested separation of all marital financial interests." Calloway opened the file slowly. Inside were signatures, transfer confirmations, private legal correspondence, and one final document dated 7 years earlier. Authorization of personal inheritance liquidation. His eyes stopped there. Marceline had sold her late grandmother's inherited properties in Savannah to save his company. Properties she once swore she would never touch because they were the last pieces of family history left to her. Suddenly memories returned with brutal clarity. The sleepless nights. The unexplained phone calls. The way she reassured him during the collapse while quietly carrying fear he never bothered to ask about. Calloway leaned back in silence while the executives around him processed the revelation with growing disbelief. The billionaire empire carrying his last name had survived because his wife sacrificed her own legacy to protect it. And last night, he had humiliated her publicly over a woman who cared more about cameras than loyalty. For the first time in years, Calloway Thorne no longer felt powerful sitting at the head of the table. He felt exposed. Small. And somewhere far deeper than pride, shame finally began settling into his chest like winter settling over the city. 3 months later, Manhattan had traded winter ice for the soft golden warmth of early spring, but Callaway Thorne still woke up every morning to silence. The estate no longer felt like a home. It felt like punishment preserved in marble and glass. Marceline's favorite piano near the west wing remained untouched. The orchids stopped appearing in crystal vases. Even the staff moved differently now, quieter somehow, as if the absence of one woman had removed warmth from the entire property. Callaway buried himself and worked to avoid the emptiness waiting for him at night. But guilt had a way of following powerful men into every room they entered, especially when regret arrived too late. That evening, black luxury vehicles lined the entrance of the Astoria Crown Hotel, where New York's elite gathered for the annual Sterling Foundation Gala, one of the most exclusive charity events on the East Coast. Cameras flashed endlessly beneath towering gold lights, while reporters chased billionaires and celebrities across the velvet carpet. Callaway adjusted the cuff of his dark suit before stepping from his car, composed on the outside, exhausted underneath. Beside him, Vesa Langley smiled brightly for photographers, wearing diamonds he barely remembered buying her. Their relationship had changed quickly after Marceline left. Without the thrill of secrecy, Vesa suddenly felt shallow, loud, temporary. She complained constantly about attention, luxury trips, media coverage, and social invitations, as though love itself were measured by headlines and expensive gifts. Callaway noticed now what he failed to notice before. Vesa admired power. Marceline had admired the man. Before the power existed. Inside the ballroom, crystal chandeliers reflected against polished champagne towers, while a jazz quartet played near the marble staircase. The room buzzed with old money and political influence until suddenly the atmosphere shifted without warning. Conversation slowed. Heads turned toward the entrance. Even photographers instinctively raised their cameras at the same time. Callaway followed the movement lazily at first. Then his breath caught. Marceline stood beneath the grand archway wearing a floor-length white gown that moved like liquid light beneath the chandeliers. Elegant, calm, untouchable. Her natural curls framed her face softly, while diamond earrings shimmered against her deep brown skin with quiet sophistication. But it was not her beauty that stunned the room. It was the way she carried herself now. She was no longer standing beside someone powerful. She had become powerful herself. Beside her walked several internationally recognized investors and political figures speaking to her with visible respect. A reporter near the staircase whispered in disbelief, "That is Marceline Brooks. She is leading the New Horizon Equity Initiative." Another voice followed immediately. "I heard they are preparing a major acquisition this year." Callaway felt the room tilt slightly beneath him. He watched Marceline smile politely at guests while cameras chased her across the ballroom the same way they once chased him. But tonight nobody looked at her like a billionaire's wife. They looked at her like the future. Vesa noticed the attention immediately and tightened her grip around Callaway's arm. "Why is everyone acting like she is royalty?" she muttered bitterly. Callaway did not answer. Because deep down, he finally understood something humiliating. Marceline had never needed his last name to command a room. He had simply been too arrogant to notice the power she carried all along. Then, across the crowded ballroom, Marceline's eyes met his for the first time in 3 months. No anger, no sadness, no longing, just calm recognition. And somehow, that hurt Callaway far more than hatred ever could. The music inside the ballroom continued softly beneath the crystal chandeliers, but for Callaway the entire evening had already fractured into before and after the moment Marceline walked into the room. He watched her from across the crowd while investors, senators, and executives surrounded her with admiration that felt painfully genuine. Nobody pitied her. Nobody whispered about scandal anymore. They respected her. That realization settled deeper into him than jealousy ever could. Vesa noticed his silence almost immediately. "You have been staring at her for the last 10 minutes, she said sharply while adjusting the diamond bracelet around her wrist. "People are noticing." Callaway barely heard her. Marceline stood near the foundation stage speaking with an older philanthropist from Boston, her posture calm and graceful beneath the soft gold lighting. She laughed quietly at something the man said. And for one devastating second, Calloway remembered how rare that laugh had become inside their marriage. Not because she changed first, because he stopped giving her reasons to use it. Calloway. Vessa's voice hardened this time. Are you even listening to me? He turned toward her slowly. And suddenly, everything about the relationship felt exhausting. The forced glamour, the staged photographs, the endless need for validation. He remembered how Vessa complained during a private vacation in Aspen because another billionaire's girlfriend received more media attention than she did at a charity event. He remembered the irritation in her voice every time he chose work over expensive dinners. He remembered how she once asked whether Marceline signed a prenuptial agreement before marrying him, not out of curiosity, but calculation. At the time, he ignored the warning signs because arrogance made men mistake attention for affection. But standing here tonight, watching Marceline command respect without demanding it, he finally understood the difference between admiration and love. I think you should go home, he said quietly. Vessa blinked in disbelief. Excuse me. This is not working anymore. The color drained slightly from her face before irritation replaced it. You are ending things because your wife wore a white dress and smiled at rich people for one night. Calloway's jaw tightened. Do not talk about her like that. Vessa laughed once under her breath, bitter and sharp. Interesting. You had no problem humiliating her a few months ago. The truth landed harder because it came from someone who helped create the wound. Across the ballroom, Marceline accepted a glass of sparkling water from a server while photographers continued circling nearby. She looked peaceful now, untouched by the chaos that once controlled her life. Calloway realized then that losing her was not the punishment. Understanding her value after she stopped belonging to him was. Vessa stepped closer, lowering her voice. You are only chasing her now because she stopped chasing you. Calloway said nothing because somewhere deep inside, he feared she might be right. The orchestra music swelled gently through the ballroom while guests applauded the beginning of the foundation presentation, but Calloway barely noticed. His eyes remained fixed on Marceline as she moved gracefully through the crowd, like someone who had finally remembered her own worth. And for the first time since the divorce papers appeared on his breakfast table, Calloway Thorne understood a painful truth powerful men rarely admit out loud. Sometimes the woman they betray is the very woman who made them extraordinary in the first place. Near midnight, the gala slowly faded into the soft hum of departing guests and distant jazz music echoing through empty marble corridors. Outside the Astoria Crown Hotel, spring rain shimmered beneath the city lights while black cars lined the curb waiting for Manhattan's elite to disappear back into their private worlds. Marceline stepped through the revolving doors alone, the white fabric of her gown moving gently in the cool night air. Behind her, photographers still called her name, but she no longer turned toward cameras for validation. She had already survived the worst thing a woman could lose, the illusion that love alone could protect her dignity. Marceline. Calloway's voice stopped her halfway down the stairs. She paused quietly without facing him immediately. When she finally turned around, he looked nothing like the untouchable billionaire the world admired. The confidence remained, but it was fractured now by regret that had arrived too late to change anything. Rain touched the shoulders of his dark coat, while the city glowed behind him in blurred gold reflections. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Some endings became too heavy for ordinary language. Then Calloway reached into his pocket slowly and removed something wrapped carefully in protective cloth. The black velvet coat. He stepped closer and held it toward her with trembling restraint. It belongs to you, he said softly. Marceline looked down at the coat for a long moment. Once, it represented love, then betrayal. Now it felt like evidence from another lifetime. She accepted it gently, not because she wanted the memory back, but because she no longer feared it. Calloway's voice lowered. I was a better man when you loved me. The honesty in that sentence almost hurt more than the betrayal itself. Marceline lifted her eyes toward him calmly. No, she replied with quiet grace. You were simply closer to the man you were supposed to become. The rain continued falling softly between them while traffic moved through Manhattan like rivers of light. Calloway looked at her as though searching for one final chance to undo the damage. But some women do not return after they finally remember their worth. Marceline stepped toward the waiting car at the curb, the velvet coat folded carefully over her arm. Before entering, She looked back at the skyline one last time. The city had witnessed her humiliation, but it had also witnessed her rebirth. Then she disappeared into the warm glow of the car without looking back again, leaving Calloway standing alone beneath the rain with all the wealth in the world and none of the peace he once took for granted.